Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Financial Wellbeing Show, where we're going to be talking about debt, as it is Debt Awareness Week this week. Today joining me is Hiran Panchal. Hiran, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Charlie. Thank you. Yeah, very much looking forward to today's show. It's, as you say, a debt awareness special. So who do we have on the show, Charlie?
Well, we have Adam Owen and Emma Waller joining us to have a chat about debt awareness. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about what we are talking about in terms of debt, the impact of debt on people's personal well-being, strategies of recovering from debt, and also avoiding getting back into debt in the future.
First and foremost, hello, Adam. Hello, Emma. How are you both?
Hi, good afternoon to both of you. Nice to be here.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, it's great to be here, and you know, particularly as we are in Debt Awareness Week, it's the right week to be talking about this exact topic, isn't it? And I don't know, maybe if we're going to define what the key elements of debt are, it's maybe worth us each chipping in with a particular thing. So I'm going to go first with the form of debt that I have the most concern over for people, and that is buy now, pay later debt, or even just those ones that extend it to just a 3-month cycle of management, because I think they can be really tricksy.
I think that's a brilliant suggestion. And Emma?
Yes, again, working across lots of delivery in terms of this market here, lots of people talking about their experiences with the sort of buy now, pay later. And initially on the surface, it just seems such a great idea, doesn't it? Let's just spread our payments over 3 or 4 equal terms, and or leave it for a couple of months and then come back to it in a few months' time. What an easy way of getting some of those, things that we want, some of those luxuries, and spreading it over time. So yeah, lots of people on the surface really do think it is a great idea. I think, however, I'm seeing lots of people really struggling, particularly with the management of these types of products, particularly as they are just not regulated. And I think that's one of the key problems too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned luxury goods, and what interested me or horrified me was I think you can get Deliveroo on buy now, pay later. So that's the weird thing. It doesn't just seem to be luxury goods, or I guess what some of us might see as luxury goods. I'm guessing the typical ones are things like trainers and sort of high-end fashion is what I associate it with. But Deliveroo, I mean, getting buy now, pay later in your KFC seems a bit mad. How about you, Hiran? What do you think?
I totally agree and echo the sort of points made earlier, but I also feel there is a case for sort of debt as in terms of the cost of living crisis we're living in, and debts such as utility bill debt is quite a one that sort of comes up. So debts which can make a difference, priority debts, if you would like to sort of call it that. When the ones you talk about or have covered are sort of maybe, let's say, unsecured. But the ones that I feel probably require a little bit more of the attention in this is the ones that could make a difference if you don't pay and have drastic consequences. So I feel that's something that does need a clear understanding of what is priority, what isn't.
Yeah, I think you make a really interesting point there, Hiran. I saw a statistic from the news the other day that we collectively, the nation, owe £8 billion to energy companies at the moment. So we're £8 billion in arrears. And that £8 billion is it's a colossal figure, and it extends across so many homes in the UK. So many families that are impacted by this. And sometimes when you're faced with the cost of living crisis and all the various challenges, it's really tempting, isn't it? Going back and coming full circle, it's really tempting to buy a KFC for the family just for one evening to alleviate all of that, and spread the cost. because it feels easy at the time. And I think this is one of the interesting things for me, is that one of the biggest challenges around debt is that oftentimes it's incredibly easy to access, at least in the first instance, when we begin to start to just engage with debt vehicles. And we talk about debt sometimes in a very negative way, but it's not always a negative way. It can facilitate things. People can take on debt to start a business, or people can take on debt to make repairs to their home so that actually they're not living in stress all the time. There's lots of really good positive reasons for engaging in debt, borrowing and then repaying it later. But it's when that begins to get a little out of control, isn't it? And when we find that we're borrowing and then borrowing again to pay off previous borrowing, and we're never really catching up. And then the amount of debt that we have becomes more than maybe a month's worth of income. And then it becomes more than 2 months worth of income. And then maybe it becomes more than 3 months worth of income. And eventually it builds to a point where we're really struggling with it. And the positives that came from that debt are then wiped out. And it becomes quite a negative and damaging spiral. So I think that finding the balance in this discussion is quite important. That there'll be plenty of people watching this right now who are, they're in debt, or they have finance that is just facilitating their day-to-day lives. How many of us have a car that is bought on finance? And so that is a form of debt, but we don't always see it as such. And it's always or often seen as a positive. We take on the debt, we buy a new car, and we get the new car. So I think, Emma, it can often be seen as a positive, but then maybe it can run out of control a little.
Exactly. And that's why we talk about that sort of, it's our if we're managing debt, or is it unmanageable? And as you quite rightly say, it's drilling down into that budget and, working out all those income expenditures, and then looking at that bottom line and thinking, is my expenditure greater this month than what I've got coming in? And if it is, where's this going, and what's happening? And inevitably, that's where the debt begins, as you say. And it is that spiral that each month we are, I guess, that it's compounding each month and it's getting bigger. And that's where we start to move into that unmanageable debt cycle. So our bills, our income isn't covering everything that needs to go out, that we are using these short-term credit options to see us through perhaps to that next pay packet. So once we're using all those short-term debt, and we may be using that to see through the day-to-day, we then might use some other types of credit, which perhaps are much more longer term. And again, once that starts adding up, it becomes much more tricky. And that's when that balancing act becomes a bit more difficult. And as we said earlier, we may be using those buy now, pay later products to see us through, to delay any payment so that we can pay those priority bills or pay any priority debts that we perhaps might have. And then that cycle, we're just not solving it, or some people aren't solving it anyway. And it's just continuing. And until we try and break that cycle, it is just going to rapidly decline. And unfortunately, the impact of that is it can lead to financial anxiety, that emotion, that worry, that stress, not just on our mental health, but on our physical health too, becomes much more apparent.
Yeah, I mean, that's really true, Emma. I mean, just for, I guess, the viewers, I'm thinking, what's the difference between a credit card and buy now, pay later? Because they sound very similar, but there's obviously a distinction, I think, between the two, which maybe our viewers would find useful to know. I have thrown you in the deep end there.
No, that's
fine. But what do you say is the difference?
Okay. So first of all, let's take buy now, pay later. It's the new kid on the block. I think we saw the likes of Klarna, ClearPay. We've got PayPal 3, PayPal 4. I think it's PayPal 3, isn't it, that it's called? But these are short-term options that we might be offered either at an online checkout, so when we buy something online, or when we're in store, I've seen it where, particularly in high street shops, perhaps, where they offer this. Do you want to put it on a buy now, pay later? And in fact, some retailers online may offer this as a default payment method. So some people actually may not always be aware that they're signing up to this. But essentially what buy now, pay later is, it's a very short-term scheme that allows us to spread the cost of that payment over 3 or 4 months, or we get the option to delay full payment for 3 months' time. So what that might do is it might help us temporarily to budget. So you might not have that money today to pay for it all, depending on what it is. However, if you spread those payments equally over the next 3 to 4 months, that's easier to budget for. Or if I delay payments for a couple of months, I might have the money then to be able to pay that bill off. However, one thing that I always get people to think about is, if you are not going to be in a particularly different situation next month or in the next 3 months, delaying it really doesn't have any additional benefits, particularly if you've got no additional income coming in. You're likely to still be in that same position in 3 to 4 months' time than you are today. So by delaying it doesn't necessarily bring any greater benefits. However, what it does allow us to do, perhaps it allows us to build those extra amounts into our budget so that we can plan it out. Now, where I am seeing lots of people become bothered or concerned about this is a lot of people, particularly younger people, and these type of products really are sold to them. We're seeing people have multiple buy now, pay laters, and seeing people upwards of 10, 12 different buy now, pay later schemes. And for the majority of people, that's when they just become really difficult to manage, because you don't know, might find it really difficult to plan out when each of those payments has got to be made. We may miss payments. We may not have sufficient payments in our bank accounts to make up all those buy now, pay laters. And that's when this becomes problematic. We also know with those products that they are not financially regulated in the UK. So the FCA currently does not regulate for these products, and it's because of the short-termness of them. So it's really, really important that whenever you use one of these, that you do understand what can happen if you're unable to make those repayments, or if your payments fail as a result of that. So please do your reading, understand what you're signing up to in advance, and also understand perhaps the consequences of non-payment if you're not able to make those final repayments. In comparison, Charlie, you did ask me about credit cards as well. Credit cards, obviously slightly different, completely regulated by the FCA. And pretty much what the credit card does is it provides us with access to a certain amount of money, and the credit card company will determine how much they think we can use. And again, all this is based on things like affordability. It's based on our credit score as well. So the amount that we're given by that card, the card provider to spend on, will often be determined by how good our credit score is. That they will obviously do that check on us first and decide what rates of interest we're going to pay for that, how much we're allowed to spend on that, and essentially whether we're accepted or declined to. So they will run all those checks and then say, actually, Emma, you've got a great credit score. We're going to give you £15,000 to spend on that card, however you see fit. And we're going to charge you an interest rate or APR of 5.9%. And I can use that card to spend how I want to. I can then each month I will receive a bill, and that bill will tell me a minimum amount. However, we would always recommend, if you can, that you pay that bill in full each month, so you're not getting any interest added onto that borrowing. And then by paying off that bill, you're using that credit card reliably, responsibly, and you don't incur, if you pay those bills off each month, you don't incur any fees, any interest, any charges. Now, going back to buy now, pay later, they actually sell themselves as there's no interest added on. There's no interest that you will need to pay on this short-term borrowing for 3 to 4 months. And essentially that's right. However, if you miss those bills, there are penalties. So those penalties may not be in an interest charge that's added onto your account. You may be charged fees. You may be charged admin costs for not paying any outstanding buy now, pay laters, where the credit card company will tell you how much each month they want you to pay as a minimum amount, or you pay the full amount in full and therefore incur no charges. But again, by not paying your credit card bill, you're going to incur the interest plus additional penalties too. So whilst one claims that it doesn't have interest charged on it, essentially by not repaying those bills, you're going to pay some fees and charges, whilst the credit card ticks over month by month. You pay that minimum amount, you might pay interest, but by missing the payment, again, there may be additional penalties, fees and charges too. So it's really, really important that you build in any repayments into your budget to check, is it affordable? Can I afford all these additional bills? Is it in my best interests? Or is it worth me even saving up for a couple of months so that I don't have to have that expensive borrowing? Should I delay the borrowing experience, save up for it, and maybe do it in a different way too?
Well, I never thought I'd hear the point of me saying it sounds like credit cards might be the good guy comparatively to the buy now, pay later. I mean, one of my favorite credit card things is that of course, credit cards typically will protect your purchase, which I find has been a really useful thing.
Definitely.
There are some positives we can take away from some of these things. Credit cards, as I said, if you get scammed, if you get ripped off using a credit card, then generally the credit card company is actually responsible for getting the money back and sorting out, which can be really helpful. And I find myself using a credit card a lot for internet transactions for that very reason. But wow, a big difference between.
There's a big difference. And going back to that sort of Section 75 protection, if anything goes wrong with that transaction, your purchase has to be between £100 and I think 30,000, if I am right. So as most of us would probably not be wanting to use anything more than that on a credit card. So it does provide that additional protection if something goes wrong and you apply directly. And it does give you much greater protections. Also with credit cards, though, I don't want to maybe sell them as the product to go to, but that you can also, if your credit score is good, you can get access to 0% credit cards. And it does mean that for however long that product runs for, 2-3 years, whatever, as long as you make those repayments regularly on what you're using, you may not incur some interest if you are really lucky enough to get accepted on a 0% rate.
And I mean that's the thing. It's habits, it's behaviours, which certainly for a financial well-being show we're going to talk about, I think, pretty soon. I think in terms of the way that these the credit cards and buy now, pay later, we've kind of covered those off. What other sorts of debt do you see? What other sorts of debt products are out there that people may come across? I can think of one really obvious one we've not talked about at all yet, which is mortgages. What should people think around those kind of things as well? Because I think this comes back to the point I believe Adam made earlier, that not all credit should be treated with suspicion.
Of course. Yeah, and mortgages is probably the one, which is what we call it's good borrowing, because in order to own our own property, most of us don't have hundreds of £1,000s sat in a bank account ready to purchase a property. And for most of us, we will need that secured borrowing to purchase a property of our dreams, or to even extend a property, or to make those changes. And mortgages at the moment have had, particularly with the base rate, the interest rates that we're seeing at the moment, which is 5.25%. So they're not particularly competitive, or they're not as competitive as they were previously before the cost of living changes impacted on those sort of the economics of borrowing. So mortgages are more expensive than they used to be. But one thing that we need to be aware of is that we now have what's called the mortgage charter. That came as a result of the impacts of these higher rates. And what it actually means is that if you've been locked into a fixed rate mortgage for maybe 5 years or longer, and you're panicking, or you're really worried about what that new repayment's going to look like once you come off those lower fixed rates, is we're allowed to now start talking to our current providers much earlier than we used to. And we're saying now, 6 months before your fixed runs out, start talking to your provider, asking them what current products are available. They don't also they can't tie you into them that they used to. So if you see something better in a couple of months' time, you can say, right, now that one doesn't seem competitive, I'm going to go to this. So we've now got the option to sign up to better deals when we see them. We're not automatically locked into a product if we think it might be suitable, but actually something better comes out down the line. And whilst we don't have a crystal ball, we don't know what's going to happen to mortgage interest rates in the future. It does appear that currently it's stabilized a little bit. So if you know you're going to come off a fixed rate, start talking now, start to find out some better deals. It's probably not going to be as good as what you've got at the moment. But what we're saying to people at the moment is, if you know that's around the corner, start, if you can, start saving, putting things away, so that maybe you've got a bit more behind you. So when those new repayments kick in, that you've actually got a little bit more saved, so you're able to afford or comfortably manage that budget a little bit better. So it's about seeing what's out there. It's about researching. It's knowing what's happening out there on the market at the moment, and really thinking about what's best for you, for your family, and how you approach that.
That's brilliant advice. Thanks, Emma. And I think that's covered off, I guess, what we call planned debt, and certainly mortgages are particularly planned debt. I'm going to move back to Hiran now on that particular point, and go to the other side of that coin, which is the impulse spending. And I was just going to ask you, Hiran, about the dangers of impulse spending and how to mitigate them. If you got any wise words of advice on that.
Well, I with sort of 4 young children, and impulse purchases happen often every time we go out. So they always occur outside of planned budgets, what you intend to. So I think these tend to add up very quickly. So I find that when you're looking at impulse purchases, so I believe they do result in rapid increasing of debt, and suggest that a strategy would be sort of delayed gratification, something around where I've seen that sort of adding something to your cart online and then waiting 24 hours, say, to see, do you still need that item? Maybe, typically I've known many companies to even send you a code if they note that there's something in a basket to reduce the cost of an item, potentially helping you with that. So I think that sort of making an impulse purchase is very much connected to maybe money behaviors or an emotional state you may be feeling at the time. So that delayed gratification could be a good strategy. Any other strategies you feel they could use, Emma?
Again, I really love this sort of delaying the purchasing technique. And again, it's something that I also suggest to people I'm working with. I think as well, it's really is, first of all, exploring what it is they want that purchase, but what is it they want to buy, and really going right back to the why. What is it that you want? Because for me, it's sort of stripping the decision that people think, I want to borrow for X, Y, Z, but actually have you thought of actually saving up for it first? Because again, it may be that for some things we don't necessarily need to borrow now. It's about slowing down the purchasing. Do I need it now? Can I find an alternative way of getting that? And also, again, living with teenagers, it's things like the brand new phone. Actually need a new phone, or should I look for one that's maybe a year old that will save me that money? Same with cars. Do I need something brand new, or actually is it worthwhile thinking about something secondhand, or something that's been used previously, which is going to save you a lot of money? I do that with a lot of, and again, using sites where the likes of auction sites that you actually don't need to purchase things that perhaps, but I know there's a lot of FOMO. I know there's people feel that like they're missing out, that they need, that people feel that they need to do that to sort of have that particular image around lifestyle. And I don't think social media helps with some of these things, but it's really working out, do you need to borrow first of all, or are there other options that I can use that means I don't have to spend that much money or borrow that much money to start with? And it's for having those conversations with those loved ones and thinking about, right, if we do borrow, what's the best way of paying it back? Can I overpay? Can I get rid of the debt that little bit quicker? And also making sure you know what happens if you can't pay, and doing that sort of background checking and making sure you understand how that APR works, what the interest rates, is it affordable, is it in budget, and doing that work first before actually jumping straight in and saying, I want this now and I'm going to get a personal loan to afford that, or to pay that back, where actually it may not be in our best interests for our, particularly for our well-being, to take that approach. But going back to the sort of strategies, delay it, become more mindful about what you're spending your money on. Delay the purchase, and actually thinking about, is this something I really need, or is it something that I simply just want?
That's a very good strategy, and I agree. And as we talk many a times, money is, as much as you know what's the right thing. Money is also emotional. So I'd love to bring in Adam Owen into this and ask Adam, what are the sort of emotional impacts of debt?
Yeah, thanks, here. And it's interesting, isn't it, Emma, that I think that we've all suffered emotional impacts over money over the years, or at least most people have, haven't they? Because, anyone's situation can change in an instant. And, given that we have lived through financial crises and a pandemic, and sometimes it's not actually being in debt, sometimes it's the fear of getting into debt that is enough to set an emotional pattern running. So even at the beginning of the pandemic, when so many people were worrying about, well, am I going to have a job? If we all go into lockdown, what's going to happen? Before the advent of government assistance, but for those people who were self-employed, who didn't get as much access to the government assistance as furlough allowed, then what happened there? And people began to think, well, all of a sudden, the certainty that we had that yes, we can afford to pay debt, maybe went away for a lot of people. And there you go through a whole gamut of emotions, don't you? There is shame, there's overwhelm. We can catastrophize. We can start thinking about things that haven't yet happened right now today, and may not happen at all in the future, but we begin to build these things up in our minds. And then, of course, you've got this idea of, well, how do I tell other people? What impact will it have on me? Am I going to afford to pay my tax bill? If I don't pay my tax bill, am I going to get into real trouble? Will I become bankrupt? Could I lose the house? Could we become homeless? How am I going to tell the kids? All of these things can spiral incredibly quickly. And it can be that quick that you can go from, I feel okay right now in this moment, to all of a sudden I really don't feel okay, and it feels like the walls are closing in and everything is going very horribly wrong. And then if you then live with that for a long period of time, then actually our subconscious minds can kick in and almost think, well, it becomes a habit. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you think about is how much debt you're in. When you go to sleep at night, the last thing you think about is how much debt you're in. You walk around getting on with your daily life, looking at other people who seem to be enjoying themselves, having a meal with their family, or going to the cinema, or going to football practice, and all these other things, and you think, well, how are they getting on with their lives when I feel like I feel? And so it can feel incredibly isolating as well when you have what feels like an overwhelming problem, and you can't see a way beyond that. How else do you think it manifests and impacts on our financial well-being, but also on our well-being generally?
Yeah, I think that financial anxiety has a massive impact on the whole part of our lives, not just in terms of the physical, because again, once we start that anxiety, it can lead to stress, it can exacerbate further, and if we maybe have any pre-existing mental health concerns, it might make that feeling even worse and much more difficult to manage. And I think that fear really stems from this uncertainty, not knowing. And if we don't know what's around the corner, we can't plan for that. So if we don't know where we're heading, or we don't know what we're doing, those emotions build. And one of the key problems that we really know about debt and the impact of it is that what we do is we start to become we start to not talk about it. We start to fear, as you say, that shame, that worry. I don't want to have to tell my partner, my children, my kids. I don't want to even talk to my providers. But one thing that we must encourage people to do who are in that situation, first of all, is please talk about it. There are so many fantastic organizations out there who have heard this before, who specialize in that support, who will provide the guidance. And people who I speak to who have been in debt support services have really, really benefited from just being able to offload and have those conversations with those specialists. Because remember, if you talk to a specialist debt advisor, they have so many different options available to them that they can do with you that we don't have as individuals. So please don't fear talking about it. Please, if you can, find the local debt support. They are busy, but there is an awful lot of great support out there, and they are ready to help you.
That's really interesting, Emma, that you've moved really quickly on to thinking about how do we begin to just deal with this and recover from the challenges of being in debt. And I think that it's, for me, really about finding a start point. And sometimes the start point isn't always picking up the phone to one of those agencies, and there's some brilliant agencies. Step Change is a phenomenal organization, and there are many others, Citizens Advice, etc., as you've mentioned. But sometimes I think it's actually just beginning to organize your own thoughts as well, and start to just write down how you're feeling, because before you then talk to somebody else, and the start point is so often, yes, go and talk to somebody else, but organize your thoughts and think about exactly what is happening and how you're feeling, because we can sort of gloss over that a bit, can't we?
We can, and you're completely right. For many people, being able to manage their debt is something that they could probably, as you say, they can work on. There's an amazing, I think it's called the Mental Health and Money Advice website that has a fabulous journal. It's called the Toolkit. And it's about 50 pages long, but it actually starts with, how are you feeling today about your financial worries? And it is, I recommend it to all the people who I work with who are struggling. It's endorsed by the NHS as well. And it really does help people clarify where they are, work out where their struggles might be in terms of the debt, the amount. So it gets them to sort of do a bit of housekeeping. So where do those debts sort of sit? How much is on your credit cards? Where is all that debt? What APR are you paying on each of those? So you can see that big picture. How much is outstanding on your mortgage? If you've got a PCP agreement for your car, what's outstanding on that? So it just gets you to see that big picture, and then really gets you to think about your emotions, your feelings, and then starts to build that confidence and starts to provide different solutions or suggestions. And the first thing is always do that budget. Start blank page, do your new budget, look at where all that money is going. And then by looking at that, start to work out, do I need to speak to the credit card company? Do I need to let them know? Do I need some support with paying off the car loan? Who should I be talking to, and what can I be doing? So yeah, you're completely right, Adam. There may be things lots of people can do, first of all, on their own to help overcome and to try and manage that situation independently before you actually think, actually, I've tried that. There's nothing else perhaps I feel I can do now. Maybe now's the time I should seek out that specialist support.
Absolutely. And as we're getting toward the end of our time, I know that Hiran and Charlie are rejoining us, and it's, there are so many things that people could and should do right now. And for some people who are watching this right now, who are experiencing the feelings of overwhelm and stress that debt causes, and that may well be impacting your health and your relationships and every aspect of your life, because it can permeate everything, then I think that we should say thank you for watching this far and sticking with the show, because it's a hard watch if you're experiencing it right now. And from the perspective of where I think we should all sort of sign off today is to each maybe just add what could you do as a first step and what might that first step that you take, even if it's just a small step, be? So I'm going to come to Charlie first and say, Charlie, what would you suggest that maybe an option for a first step might be?
Oh, well, absolutely. Having been in debt trouble myself years ago, one of the reasons I'm probably a financial coach, advisor, etc. now is I would say forgive yourself. Right, this happens. People do get into debt. People do lose control of stuff, and it might even be, not just that you've been disorganized or anything else. It might be that other things in life have taken the control. The first thing is don't judge yourself. Give yourself a bit of forgiveness to start off with, and as you would a friend or anyone else you'd probably advise. And that's the first thing, is just let yourself off and accept that what's happened has happened. And then, it's ready to start facing what you need to do. And there is plenty of help and support out there, as we talked about there. But first, forgive yourself. Don't judge yourself, and let yourself, deal with the problem. People do get into these problems all the time, and it's okay. But the important thing is you give yourself a break, and you give yourself an opportunity to deal with it. Is what I would say.
Yeah, I would sort of follow up on that as well and say that, live at least initially in today, because we can catastrophize a lot and think about all the things that haven't happened and maybe will never happen. But our subconscious finds it very difficult to differentiate between things that you are thinking that might happen and the actual reality of what is happening right now. So begin to, as you address the challenges that you have with debt, begin to just live a little bit more in the now and think about, okay, today, this is what I'm doing. And if you take each day at a time, and I know it sounds like an old cliche, but sometimes cliches are there because they are true. If you take each day at a time and think, right, what can I do today, however small it might be, to just begin to improve the situation slightly? Now, that might be doing a little bit of research to find out where the help might be. That might be all that you do today. It's that one tiny thing that you can jump online and take a look, or go along to the library, or just pick up any area where you can do a little bit of research, and that's one step. And that might be today's step, but it's a step closer, and then do tomorrow's step, and then a step the next day. So take it in smaller steps, and don't try and solve it all at once, because that's when we can begin to catastrophize and feel overwhelmed again. Kieran, I'm going to throw over to you. What's yours?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I echo again sort of what you started off with there. And I have also got the lived experience of, I think it was credit card debt, actually. So I was listening intently, and the reasons was sort of from a younger sort of time when credit cards were sort of given out as much as you could, sort of as sweets in a shop, so to speak. You could apply for many companies. There were no sort of digital ages with linking credit scores or anything such as that. And you got into a vicious cycle of the actual sort of credit scores, as all that were covered earlier today. But I believe something that is important, and which sort of started my journey, was communication, actually getting to speak to the providers, speaking to the sort of the creditors, because knowing what your creditors can and cannot do sort of takes away some of that worry and uncertainty of what may happen. So understanding, because they also have to adhere to processes, depending on the types of debts they are. Understanding your rights are quite important. So knowing that, I feel it's a good place to sort of give you the empowerment to ensure to know that A, you're not on your own, and B, what can be done. So it's just a good starting point in my opinion. Emma, what would you say?
Yeah, mine would be open that letter. We know people who are in debt often go into what we call an avoidance situation, where out of sight, out of mind, it's easier to bury my head in the sand and not deal with it, and therefore I don't have to think of it. So we have this automatic response to do that. My response would be open that letter. If you think you can't do it on your own, get a trusted friend, sit with them, someone you trust, a family member, a neighbor who can help you. Just literally open that mail, open that inbox, and then don't go in. If it's important, then obviously reach out. We can't deal, or we can't know what we don't know. And the more information that we have to help us deal with these problems, then the more solutions or better solutions we can find. And actually, the quicker we deal with it, then the less we're going to be worried and go into that feeling of overwhelm. So it will benefit you if you open up, start talking about these things, but actively start to manage the situation. As we've said throughout, there's lots of help out there, people waiting to help you too.
Love that. There is obviously the sort of financial well-being as well as emotional and the holistic well-being from what comes from managing that. So thank you for that, Emma. Charlie.
Well, I think that's all we've got time for today, Kieran. So I guess we should wrap the show up. Thank Adam and Emma for joining us today and giving such great insight. I mean, it's really interesting, all the stuff we talked about, from buy now, pay later, to credit cards, to understanding that there's kind of good and bad debt, right? I mean, there's some debt like the buy now, pay later, which sounds pretty rubbish. But then sometimes debt is something we need and actually is productive, like mortgages, as we talked through. And then we talked about that planned debt, so things like mortgages, and you talked about the impulse debt as well, and how to deal with that. And then we've talked about the various solutions out there, and there is so much help out there for everyone. Please have a look at things like Money Helper, the government's website, which has links to all of the debt services that are recognised by the government, things like Step Change, which was mentioned, and also, as Emma mentioned, that Mental Health and Money Toolkit. If you Google Mental Health and Money Toolkit, I've just done it and it came up with it. That's the journal that Emma was talking about, that's recommended by the BMA and the NHS as a great place to start your journey if you are struggling just to deal with those overwhelming thoughts around that. Kieran, have you got anything to add before we go?
Well, I'll just concur to just say, as I think you did earlier as well, it's you are not alone. For all the sort of listeners and viewers who are sort of catching up on it. So in Debt Awareness Week, I think if any action points I would sort of point out to, there are steps you could take, and Step Change, exactly that, sort of making those changes in steps. So that stepchange.org is a good place to sort of start. And even if you sort of have a look online in your own space and time, until you're ready to take offer guidance, should we say. So thank you, Charlie, for that.
Thank you, Kieran. And goodbye from us.
Goodbye indeed. See you next time.